The morning light crept softly into the apartment, filtering through sheer curtains she had chosen because they made everything look gentler than it was. The city beyond the windows was already awake, cars humming, people moving with purpose, but inside, time lingered, suspended between what had been and what was about to fracture. Holly Keller stood in the bedroom doorway, hands resting on the handle of her suitcase, watching Wesley knot his tie in the mirror. "You're quiet," Wesley said, glancing at her reflection. "Just tired," she replied quickly. He turned, studying her in that way he always did, careful, attentive. He smiled, soft and familiar. "You're going to have fun," he said. "7 days of sun, no responsibilities, no wedding spreadsheets." She laughed, a little too brightly. "Don't sound so relieved." "I am relieved," he admitted. "You've been stressed." That much was true. She had been stressed. Wedding plans, expectations, the weight of permanence pressing down on her chest in quiet moments she hadn't said out loud. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, breathing him in. For a moment, guilt flickered, sharp and unwelcome. "Stop," she told herself. "It's just a week." Let's backtrack a few weeks to where this all started. Wesley had insisted on keeping his house and staying over at Holly's apartment weekends or the odd night. The arrangement worked well. It gave them space to breathe, but still miss each other. Saturday morning, Holly locked the door of her apartment and headed to the boutique where her wedding dress was waiting for her. She stepped into the boutique, overwhelmed by the beauty of the gowns on display. "Hey, Pam, is the dress ready?" "Holly, of course. Would you like to try it on?" Pam led Holly to a fitting room and hung the dress on the hook. She caught her breath. "That is beautiful," Holly said as she slipped into the dress. She looked at herself in the mirror, tears welling in her eyes. "I am the luckiest woman," she said softly, but inside, Holly was fighting her own demons. A month earlier, she had bumped into Axel, her ex. They had coffee and talked about everything. Afterwards, they exchanged numbers. They spoke for hours at night, and old feelings started to creep in. It was during one of the messages that Axel mentioned his trip to the Maldives. They had decided to hook up one last time before she settled into a life with Wesley. Sunday, when Wesley came over, she asked, "Wes, would it be all right if I spent a week with the girls in the Maldives? I think it would do me good to get away for a break." Wesley didn't hesitate. "Of course you must. It will give you time to relax and calm your nerves." At the airport, everything felt unreal. She wheeled her suitcase beside him through the terminal, surrounded by travelers clutching passports and boarding passes, all of them heading somewhere else. Wes carried her handbag without thinking, their fingers brushing occasionally in intimacy so practiced it felt permanent. "You'll text when you land?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "You promise?" "I promise." He kissed her then, the kind of kiss that said, "We're solid," that said, "This is just a pause, not a goodbye." As she walked toward security, she turned once more, waving. He waved back, watching until she disappeared from sight. He didn't know that she would never come back the same woman. The plane hummed with passengers finding their seats and putting their luggage in the overhead compartments. Holly found her seat, buckled in, and pulled out her phone. A message waited for her. "Gate B17. You made it." Her heart jumped, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to excitement. She typed back, "I'm here." She didn't look around immediately. She didn't have to. She knew exactly where he would be. When she finally lifted her gaze, he was already watching her. Axel was older than she remembered, familiar in a way that bypassed logic and went straight to muscle memory. He smiled, the same crooked smile that once made her feel reckless and alive. "Hey," he said quietly, sliding into the seat beside her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Hey." That single word felt like crossing a line she had pretended didn't exist. Back home, Wes went about his day unaware of the moment everything tilted. He attended meetings, answered emails, drank coffee that had gone cold while he stared at spreadsheets without absorbing them. There was an underlying ease to the day. She's gone, but she's safe. The comfort of trust. That evening, he cooked dinner for one, plating it carefully out of habit. He sat at the table and checked his phone. No message yet. He smiled to himself. Long flight. In the Maldives, the heat was overwhelming and salt filled her lungs as she stepped off the plane. The villa was breathtaking, white walls, glass doors opening onto water so clear it didn't look real. 2 glasses of champagne waited on the table. Just like before, Axel said, setting his bag down. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Yeah, she said, just like before. They didn't talk about the lie. They talked about the past instead, which was easier. Memories folded neatly into nostalgia, smoothing out the rough edges, rewriting history into something warmer, kinder. That night, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, her phone lighting up on the bedside table. A message from Wes. Landed okay? She read it but didn't reply. Instead, she turned the phone face down and told herself she would respond in the morning. Morning came with sunlight and a light unease. After breakfast, they headed to the beach, took photos, and had cocktails. Holly opened her Instagram and scrolled through. She uploaded some of the photos, careful with angles and captions. Girls' trip. She didn't tag anyone. She didn't think about reflections in glass or careless shadows. Back home, Wes saw the post during lunch. He smiled. Good, he thought. She's happy. By the second day, the silence felt intentional. He sent another message. Everything okay? Delivered. Unread. A faint unease settled in his chest. He wasn't in panic mode yet, just confused. She wasn't great at texting, but she wasn't this distant. That night, while lying in bed alone, he opened Instagram without thinking. He saw photos of an airport lounge, a champagne flute, and in the reflection, someone else. His stomach dropped. He stared longer than he should have, zooming in, hoping his eyes were lying to him. They weren't. On the third day, Holly blocked him. It wasn't dramatic, just a tap of a screen justified easily in her mind. I can't deal with this right now. I'll explain when I get back. She didn't know that this small, cowardly act would hurt more than any image ever could. Back home, Wes tried to send a message. He stared at his phone as the message failed to send. Again. The unease turned into something colder, something clarifying. He sat very still with his phone in his hands, wondering if the life he thought he had was already gone. On her final night, Holly laughed freely, wine warm in her veins, the past reclaiming space it no longer deserved. Wesley didn't sleep. Images of Holly with Axel played in his mind. She was the woman he had loved deeply. He had trusted her unconditionally. Tears streamed down his face. He didn't try to stop them. He let out raw screams that tore through his soul. After he was empty, he washed his face and opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he searched for a private investigator. He needed the truth, and truth, once found, changes everything. Then he opened Instagram and looked at the same 3 photos over and over again. The reflection in the champagne glass, the shadow beside her on the plane, the smile she wore when she thought no one was looking. Every image felt strangely distant, as if it belonged to someone else's life. He felt rage crawling through him. He closed his laptop and went to bed. Kaya Collins, the private investigator, arrived precisely at 9 the next morning. Wesley opened the door and she stepped in. They walked to the kitchen, set up her laptop, and opened the folder. I want to be clear, she said. You didn't imagine this, and it didn't begin last week. His jaw tightened. How long? He asked. Kaya didn't answer immediately. She slid the laptop toward him. Phone records, travel inquiries, encrypted messages that had been deleted but not erased. His chest tightened as he scrolled. Weeks, months, a slow, careful reconnection disguised as coincidence. I miss the way you knew me. This doesn't mean anything. It's just for closure. Closure. He exhaled slowly, the sound brittle. She told me she was done with him, he said. Kaya nodded once. She told herself that too. The words landed heavy. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at a city that felt suddenly foreign. How bad? He asked quietly. Kaya hesitated. They shared a room, she said finally. This wasn't accidental proximity. This was intention. He closed his eyes, not because he couldn't look, but because he needed to stay upright. When he turned back to her, something had changed. Okay, he said. What happens next? Kaya studied him carefully. That depends. Are you looking for justice or peace? He didn't answer right away. Justice sounded loud, messy, and public. Peace sounded clean. I want my life back, he said at last. Kaya nodded. Then we moved quietly. The next 48 hours were frantic. He canceled the wedding without spectacle. Each vendor received a short, courteous email. Then he listed his house and sold to the first buyer who could close quickly. He didn't care about profit. He cared about distance. The joint accounts were cleared legally, meticulously, every transaction documented, every step above reproach. He drove to Holly's apartment and packed all his stuff. He didn't take what wasn't his. Each action felt less like revenge and more like reclaiming oxygen. Then he drove back to his house. The hardest part was packing. Photographs, shared books, the mug she'd chipped and refused to throw away. He boxed his life with deliberate restraint, leaving behind anything that felt too tangled. He needed to erase her. At dawn on the third day, he sat on the floor of the empty house, surrounded by boxes, and allowed himself one last moment of grief. He cried for the man he'd been when he believed love meant endurance at any cost. I deserved better, he said aloud. The words didn't feel arrogant. They felt overdue. Wesley opened the driver's door, turned the engine, and drove away without looking back. The apartment greeted her like a stranger. That was the thought that landed first. This place doesn't know me anymore, as she stepped inside and let the door close behind her. The sound echoed too long, too sharply, as if the space itself were hollow. Hello, she called, already knowing the answer. Her suitcase rolled across the floor, the wheels rattling loudly against the tiles. The sound made her flinch. Everything sounded wrong. It sounded too empty, too exposed. She set her bag down slowly and looked around. Places on the walls were bare. Where the framed photos had once been, there were only pale rectangles of dustless paint. The console table by the door was empty, stripped of keys, mail, and the bowl he always forgot to empty. A thin unease slid down her spine. He's angry, she told herself quickly. He's making a point. She reached for her phone, her thumb already moving to call him. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. Her chest tightened. She walked farther in, every step heavier than the last. The kitchen was immaculate. No coffee mug by the sink. No grocery list taped to the fridge. No faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. She opened the fridge. Empty. Her heart began to pound, louder than her thoughts. This isn't funny, she whispered. She moved down the hallway, dread thickening with each step. The bedroom door stood open. She stopped in the doorway, her breath catching painfully in her throat. The wardrobe hung open, its rails nearly bare. His clothes, his jackets, neatly folded shirts, the watch he always laid out the night before were missing. Only her things remained crowded together on one side like leftovers, and he had drawn a clean line through their shared life and taken only what belonged to him. Her phone buzzed violently in her hand. Startled, but hope flaring hot and sharp, she saw the notification. Joint account update balance, 0. The room tilted. No, she breathed, shaking her head. No, no, no. Her knees gave way and she slid down the wall, landing hard on the floor. The shock barely registered. Her body felt distant, unreal. Another notification followed. Then another. Emails, one by one. Wedding venue. Cancellation confirmed. Catering services, refund processed. Florist, booking terminated. Her chest constricted as if something invisible were tightening around her ribs. He wasn't angry, he was done. She scrambled upright, stumbling back toward the kitchen, panic clawing at her throat. "This is a misunderstanding," she said aloud, as if the apartment might correct her. "We just need to talk." Her eyes landed on the counter. The ring box sat there, closed. Her breath stuttered. She crossed the room slowly, dread pooling heavy in her stomach, and opened it. Empty. A sound tore from her chest, half sob, half gasp. That ring had been his grandmother's. He told her once quietly that giving it to her was the most deliberate choice he'd ever made. Now it lay abandoned, just like her. She dropped onto a chair and began dialing numbers with shaking hands. His brother went to voicemail. His best friend, no answer. She typed messages faster than she could think. "Please call me. Something's wrong. I'm home. We need to talk." Delivered. Unread. Her throat burned as she scrolled through social media, frantically searching for anything, any trace of him. Nothing. His profiles were gone, each one deleted. A chill settled deep in her bones. He hadn't just left, he had erased himself. Night fell without her noticing. The apartment grew darker, colder. She sat on the floor back against the couch that now looked too large for the room. The phone was clutched in both hands like a lifeline. She sat in the dark long after the phone went silent, the weight of consequence finally settling fully over her. Wes hadn't stayed to confront her. He didn't want to hear her side. He had simply walked away, and in that silence, she understood something terrifying. She had lost him for good. That afternoon, Wesley's phone buzzed. A text from Holly. "Please call me. I'm home. Something's wrong." He stared at the screen. For a moment, just one moment, he imagined answering, hearing her voice, letting her explain, letting the familiar pull soften his resolve. Then he remembered the block, the silence, the ease with which she'd chosen not to see him. He set the phone face down, and in doing so, he crossed an invisible line. There would be no conversations that required him to justify his pain, and, alone in the quiet of his new life, he drafted the message that Kaya, the private investigator, would deliver. "You made your choice. Please don't contact me again and stop trying to find me." When Kaya read it, she nodded. "This is the cleanest break I've seen in years," she said. He didn't smile, but he breathed easier. Holly's phone buzzed that night with an email from someone named Kaya Collins. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Mr. Grayson has asked me to relay one message only. Social media doesn't lie. You made your choice. Please don't contact me again and stop trying to find me. Please respect this boundary," Kaya added. The words blurred through her tears. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing openly, the denial finally stripped away. He wasn't hiding because he was afraid. He was hiding because he was finished. Outside, the city lights flickered on, indifferent and steady. Inside, Wes sat alone with the unfamiliar sensation of space. Grief still lived there, but so did something else. Dignity, and, for the first time since the silence began, he knew with certainty. Walking away was not weakness, it was survival. She woke to silence that felt loud. It wasn't a peaceful kind, but the kind that presses in on your ears until your own breathing sounds too loud. The apartment was unfamiliar, stripped of warmth, stripped of him. Even the light felt wrong. It was too sharp. She lay still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the words she hadn't been able to forget since the night before. Social media doesn't lie. Her phone lay beside her, screen dark. There were no missed calls, no messages, just the weight of knowing she had been seen and he had evidence. She sat up slowly, her heart already racing. "I can fix this," she told herself. "I just need to find him." Her first stop was his workplace. The building's glass exterior reflected her back at herself. She looked drawn and tired, a woman who looked like she had aged years in a single week. Inside, everything was familiar. The hum of printers, the polite smiles, the faint smell of coffee. She approached the reception desk with forced calm. "I'm here to see Wesley Grayston," she said. The receptionist typed, paused, then frowned slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "He no longer works here." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "He resigned," the woman replied, "effective immediately." The words echoed, hollow and final. "Did he leave anything?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "A forwarding number? An email?" The receptionist shook her head. "No." Holly stepped outside into the sunlight, feeling as though she'd been pushed underwater. He hadn't just left her, he had dismantled his entire life. The calls came next. She called friends, family, anyone she thought might soften. Most didn't answer. Those who did were guarded. "Please," she said to his brother, voice cracking, "I just need to know he's okay." "He's fine," he replied after a pause. "Better than fine." "Where is he?" "I can't tell you that." Her frustration flared. Why is everyone acting like I'm the enemy? There was silence on the line. Then, quietly, "Because you broke him." The call ended. She stared at her phone. Her reflection warped in the dark screen, and it occurred to her that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was consequence. By the third day, panic had hardened into obsession. She took time off work she couldn't afford to lose. She ignored emails, ignored responsibilities that now felt irrelevant compared to the singular need burning inside her. Find him. She hired her own private investigator that afternoon. Daniel Hayes was calm, precise, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. She told him everything carefully edited and painfully incomplete. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied her. "You understand," he said, "that if someone doesn't want to be found, that's usually for a reason." "I just need to talk to him," she said. "One conversation." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we start with patterns." Days passed. Daniel traced financial records, property listings, travel inquiries, but everything ended the same way. Closed, transferred, erased. Each update chipped away at her hope. "He planned this," she whispered one evening, sitting on the edge of the bed that was no longer a bed, just a mattress on the floor. "Didn't he?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes," he said, "but not long term. This was a controlled reaction. It was clean and efficient, the kind of thing someone does when something inside them finally breaks." The word lodged deep in her chest. Breaks. She thought of his calm smile at the airport, the way he had kissed her goodbye without hesitation. Had he already known? Across the city, far beyond her reach, Wesley sat at a cafe with sunlight warming the table between him and a woman whose name she didn't know. She laughed softly as he told a story, her attention undivided, her phone untouched. There was no history between them, no explanations required. He felt something unfamiliar and precious settle into place. Relief. Back in the apartment that no longer felt like home, Holly stared at the ceiling, the truth pressing down harder than any accusation ever could. She hadn't just lost him, she had forced him to choose himself, and that choice had cost her everything. By the end of the week, exhaustion stopped feeling like a side effect and started feeling like a state of being. She moved through her days in fragments, half-remembered conversations, unanswered emails, meals left untouched on the counter until they spoiled. The apartment smelled stale now, like a place abandoned mid-thought. She stopped sleeping in the bedroom. The mattress on the floor felt too intimate, too close to the life that had once existed there. Instead, she curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, the television murmuring nonsense into the dark. Her phone never left her hand. Every vibration sent a jolt through her chest, every silence carved it deeper. Daniel's calls grew more cautious. "I'm still working," he said during one update, his voice measured. "But I need to be honest with you. This is becoming consuming." "I'm fine," she said automatically. Daniel paused. "You haven't asked what I've found." She swallowed. Because I already know. The truth sat heavy between them. He's not just hiding, Daniel continued. He's rebuilding. That's harder to track. Her grip tightened on the phone. So what do I do? There was a beat of silence. You stop, he said gently, before this costs you more than it already has. She hung up without replying. That night, she did something reckless. She opened an old storage box she'd shoved into the back of the closet months ago, one she'd avoided because it contained plans, futures, promises written in ink, fabric samples, seating charts, the draft of vows she'd never finished. Her breath caught as she unfolded the paper. I promise to choose you. Every day. The words mocked her. She pressed the page flat against the table, hands trembling. When did I stop doing that? She whispered. She already knew. When choosing him became inconvenient. Her phone buzzed. A social media notification she hadn't meant to open. A tagged photo from 2 years ago surfaced in her memories, a dinner party at their place. She remembered that night vividly. Laughter, wine, the feeling of being admired. Axel had been there. She zoomed in without thinking. His hand rested on her knee beneath the table. Her stomach dropped. The realization hit with brutal clarity. This hadn't started in the Maldives. That trip had just been permission. Across the city, Wesley woke early and ran along the river, breath burning in his lungs, thoughts finally quiet. The rhythm grounded him. Footsteps, heartbeat, air. He showered, dressed, and walked into his new job feeling something dangerously close to confidence. No one knew his history here. No one asked him to explain his pain. They only asked him to show up, and he did. That evening, Wes met Ashlyn again. They sat on a park bench as dusk settled, the city softening around them. You're different, she said after a while. He smiled faintly. How so? You listen like you've learned the cost of not doing it. He considered that. Maybe I have. She didn't press. She didn't need to, and he didn't feel like he was bracing for loss. Back in the apartment, Holly sat on the floor surrounded by remnants of a future that no longer belonged to her. The truth pressed in hard now, unavoidable. She hadn't been blindsided by his leaving. She had been warned quietly, repeatedly, by guilt she ignored and boundaries she crossed, and now, alone in the wreckage, she understood the most painful lesson of all. The cracks had always been there. She just hadn't wanted to see them. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. She knew because she counted every second after her manager folded his hands on the desk and stopped smiling. We're concerned, he said carefully, eyes kind but distant in the way people get when they've already decided to step away. Your performance has dropped significantly.
I'd like to take a moment and pause. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please show a kindness by clicking like and subscribe. It would help our channel so much. Let's continue our story.
She nodded, staring at the polished surface of the desk instead of his face. Deadlines missed. Clients unanswered. Errors that never would have slipped past her before. We understand you're dealing with personal matters, he continued, but this role requires consistency. Personal matters, as if the phrase could contain the implosion of an entire life. We're going to have to let you go, he finished. There was no drama. Just paperwork slid across the desk and a polite expression that said, "This is over." She packed her desk in silence. Colleagues avoided her eyes as she passed. By the time she stepped outside with a cardboard box in her arms, the city felt unforgiving. The financial fallout followed swiftly. Her phone buzzed constantly with alerts. She stopped opening after the first few. Overdraft fees, missed payments, credit limits shrinking. The joint account had been more than convenience, it had been stability, and now it was gone. She sat on the couch that evening, staring at the wall as the weight of it pressed down on her chest. I can't do this, she whispered, but the truth was simple and cruel. She had no choice. Daniel called the next morning. I need to step back, he said. "I'm not helping you heal. I'm enabling you to stay stuck." Anger flared hot and sharp. "So that's it?" she snapped. "You're abandoning me too?" Daniel sighed. "He didn't abandon you, Holly. He left. There's a difference." The words landed hard. "You don't get to chase someone who's protecting themselves," he added gently, "and you don't get closure by forcing contact." The call ended quietly. She sat with the phone in her lap long after the line went dead, alone again. That night, she drank too much wine and scrolled through old photos she'd sworn she wouldn't look at again. Smiles, vacations, moments she'd treated as permanent. Her finger froze on one image. A dinner party. 2 years ago. Axel's hand on her knee. Visible, undeniable. The room spun. "Oh my word," she whispered. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been confusion. It had been choice repeated, hidden, justified. The shame burned hotter than any accusation ever could. Across town, Wesley stood in a bright, quiet office with sunlight pouring in through tall windows. The interview felt almost unreal. They talked about vision, growth, integrity. No one asked him to explain his past. They offered him the job before the hour was over. He walked out of the building feeling lighter than he had in years. Later, he texted Ashlyn, "I got it." Her reply came immediately, "I never doubted you." The simplicity of the trust made his chest tighten, in a good way. That evening, he packed the last of his boxes. This move wasn't about escape, it was about arrival. He found an old photo at the bottom of a box, him and his former fiancé at a wedding, laughing, young, unguarded. He studied it for a moment, then set it on the windowsill, just to remember what he would never ignore again. Holly woke the next morning to an alert from her bank. Overdraft. Again. She sat on the edge of the couch, head in her hands, breath shallow. A terrifying thought surfaced, fully formed. What if I never find him? What if this wasn't a phase but the life she had built through avoidance and betrayal? Tears slid silently down her cheeks. "I would do anything," she whispered. But even as she said it, she understood the truth that hurt most of all. Sometimes anything comes too late. The invitation sat unopened in her inbox for 2 days. She knew what it was before she read it. The subject line alone, "Former Clients and Associates Networking Evening," felt like a summons to a version of herself she no longer inhabited. She finally opened it late one night, the apartment dim, her phone the only source of light. Attendance requested. Not required. Requested. But she knew what it meant. Disappear again, and the whispers would finish the job she'd started. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. "Fine," she murmured. "One night." She stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary. None of her clothes felt right anymore. Dresses she'd once worn with confidence now felt like costumes borrowed from a woman who'd vanished. She chose something simple in the end. Neutral, forgettable. As she applied makeup, her hands trembled. "You can do this," she told her reflection. The woman staring back didn't look convinced. The venue buzzed with easy laughter and polished conversation. The kind of place where people held wine glasses delicately and spoke in half sentences designed to impress. She felt exposed the moment she stepped inside, as though everyone could see the fracture lines beneath her skin. Some greeted her warmly, others politely. A few looked away. "I heard about the wedding," someone said softly, sympathy layered with curiosity. "Yes," she replied, forcing a smile. "Plans changed. They always did." She took a sip of wine she didn't want and scanned the room. Then she saw Axel. He stood near the bar, relaxed, confident, laughing loudly with a woman whose hand rested easily on his arm. Her stomach dropped. This was the man she'd risked everything for. This was the future she'd imagined reclaiming, and he looked unchanged, untouched by consequence. He caught her eye. For a brief moment, just a flicker, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he smiled dismissively. He lifted his glass in a casual toast. Her face burned. She turned away, heart hammering. The humiliation settled deep and heavy. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exposure. Across the city, Wes stood barefoot in a sunlit apartment. Boxes lined the walls, neatly labeled. This space felt intentional, chosen with care rather than compromise. His phone buzzed. Ashlyn. Dinner tonight? I'll cook. He smiled. I'll bring wine. He paused, then added, Thank you for being patient. Her reply came quickly. There's nothing to rush. The words settled in his chest like warmth. No pressure. No timelines. Back at the event, the evening unraveled slowly. The wine dulled the sharpest edges, but not the truth. Conversations blurred. Smiles grew harder to maintain. Holly found herself standing alone near the terrace doors when a woman approached someone she barely knew. You okay? The woman asked gently. The question pierced straight through her defenses. No, she admitted, voice breaking. I'm really not. The woman nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. Sometimes, she said quietly, losing everything is the only way we learn what actually mattered. The words struck harder than any accusation. She left early, the cool night air hitting her like a slap as she stepped outside. Her legs gave way, and she sat on the curb, head in her hands, breath coming in uneven gasps. This was the reckoning. Public. Unavoidable. Later that night, Wesley stood in his kitchen with Ashlyn, glasses raised. To new beginnings, she said. To clarity, he replied. As they clinked glasses, he felt peace settle. He hadn't just survived, he had escaped, and he was no longer looking back. Holly sat in her car long after the engine had gone cold. The venue lights dimmed behind her, people spilling out in clusters of laughter and easy conversation, but she remained motionless, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, breath shallow and uneven. The image wouldn't leave her. Axel, smiling untouched, already moved on. The lie she had told herself for months finally collapsed. I didn't go back for love, she admitted. I went back because it was familiar. Her phone lay face up on the passenger seat, silent and accusing. She knew she shouldn't. Every warning sign was there, every boundary had been drawn clearly. But desperation has a way of convincing you that rules don't apply when you're drowning. She picked up the phone. She searched for the one address she knew he would still check, the professional email he'd kept even when everything else had disappeared. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before she typed. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know the truth, not the version you saw online. The trip wasn't what it looked like. I made a mistake. I was confused. I blocked you because I was afraid you'd see what I was trying to deny. I never stopped loving you. Please, just one conversation. I can explain everything. She read it twice, 3 times. Each pass stripped more certainty from the words, but she sent it anyway. The sound of the email leaving felt like a door slamming behind her. Wesley read the email the next morning. Holly sat there like a ghost from a life he no longer lived. He didn't open it immediately. He made coffee first, watched the city wake through the window, let himself exist fully in the present before allowing the past a voice. Then he read. Once. Then again. The words blurred together. Confusion, fear, love, explanation. All the things that arrived after damage had already been done. He closed the laptop and sat very still. There was no anger in him, only fatigue, the kind that comes from carrying something longer than you should have. When he opened a new message, his hands were steady. He didn't write from pain, he wrote from clarity. I believe you think you loved me, but love doesn't block someone for a week. It doesn't lie easily. It doesn't make backup plans. Please don't contact me again. I hope one day you forgive yourself. I'm no longer part of that journey. He read it once before sending. Her phone buzzed mid-afternoon. She was sitting on the couch, surrounded by silence she had finally stopped fighting. Her heart leapt violently as she saw his name. For a brief, dangerous second, hope flared. She opened the email and felt the air leave her lungs. The words struck hard, final. She reread it, searching for hesitation, for a crack she could slip through. There was none. This was his closure. Her phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor as she folded inward, a sob tearing free that she didn't try to contain. This time, there was no plan forming behind the pain. No next step, no search. It was over. Wes walked home with Ashlyn through streets washed clean by rain. She slipped her hand into his without asking. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," he replied, and he meant it. He had spoken the last truth that needed speaking. The past no longer had unanswered questions to feed on. Holly lay on the couch long after night fell, staring at the ceiling. Some losses don't come to teach you how to get back what you lost. They come to teach you who you become when you can't, and in that quiet, devastating realization, her search finally ended. The day after his email, she slept for nearly 12 hours. Not the restless, fractured sleep of the weeks before, but a deep, heavy stillness that pulled her under without dreams. When she finally woke, the apartment was quiet in a way that no longer felt hostile. It felt settled. She lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, the echo of his words still present but no longer sharp. I'm no longer part of that journey. For the first time, she didn't try to rewrite them. She let them stand. She showered, dressed, and opened the curtains fully. Sunlight spilled across the room, illuminating the emptiness she had avoided looking at directly. The space felt honest now. No illusions, no shared future clinging to the corners. She found a notebook in a drawer she hadn't opened since the wedding planning days and sat at the small table by the window. The first page remained blank for several minutes. Then she wrote, "I lied because I didn't want to choose. I betrayed because I thought I wouldn't be caught. I lost him because I valued comfort over integrity." The words hurt, but they didn't destroy her, they grounded her. This wasn't punishment, this was accountability. Over the following weeks, she dismantled what remained of the life she had been pretending to hold together. She sold furniture, donated clothes, let go of objects tied to a version of herself she no longer trusted. She moved into a smaller apartment across town. No memories, no shared history, no echo of promises she'd broken. It wasn't beautiful, but it was hers. Across the city and then beyond it, Wesley's life expanded. The new job challenged him in ways he hadn't realized he'd been craving. Responsibility without manipulation. Trust without tension. He learned the pleasure of quiet mornings, of evenings that didn't feel like negotiations. Ashlyn didn't ask for reassurance. She didn't check his phone. She met him where he stood, and that, more than passion, felt like safety. Months passed, and the world adjusted. So did they. Holly found work again. Smaller, humbler, but honest. The kind that demanded presence and offered no place to hide. She learned how to sit with discomfort without reaching for distraction. Some nights, regret still surfaced, but it no longer ruled her. One afternoon, scrolling through social media she rarely used anymore, she saw his photograph. Wes stood barefoot on a beach, sunlight threading through his hair. Beside him stood Ashlyn. Her hand rested on his arm. The ring on her finger caught the light, engaged. Her breath caught, but it didn't break her. She closed the app gently and sat back in her chair. This was his revenge. That night, she stood on her balcony, the city lights blinking below. "I hope you're happy," she whispered, and for the first time since everything fell apart, she understood the full weight of what she had lost and the quiet dignity of how he had left. Time did what grief never could. It didn't erase the past, it softened its edges, filing them down until they no longer drew blood. The sharpness dulled into something quieter, something survivable. She learned how to live inside that quiet. Her days became structured, intentional. Morning routines replaced spirals. Work filled the hours with tasks that demanded attention instead of memory. Evenings were spent reading, walking, sitting with herself in ways she had never learned to do before. She stopped checking his name, stopped wondering what version of him she would find if she looked. The absence stopped feeling like punishment. It began to feel like space. Wesley stood in front of the mirror on a morning that once would have terrified him. Instead, his hands were steady as he adjusted his jacket, the weight in his chest, not dread but anticipation. The wedding was small, no grand declarations shouted into microphones, no spectacle designed to convince anyone of permanence, just people who mattered, promises that had been considered carefully. Ashlyn met him at the end of the aisle with a smile that held no doubt. When she took his hands, she leaned in and whispered, "You look peaceful." "I am," he said, and he had never been more certain of anything in his life. That evening, Holly walked the city alone, the air cool against her skin. She didn't imagine Wes beside her, she imagined herself years from now, steadier, braver, honest in ways she hadn't known how to be before. Some loves end loudly, others end with dignity. This one ended exactly as it needed to. Later that night, Wes stood on a balcony overlooking a city washed in golden light, Ashlyn's laughter drifting from inside their home. The past no longer whispered, it had nothing left to say. His revenge had never been about what he took away, it had been about what he refused to lose. Holly kept the letter in a drawer she rarely opened, not because it hurt, but because it anchored her. It reminded her of the exact moment she stopped hoping for a different ending and accepted the one that had already arrived. Life didn't reward her for that acceptance. It didn't punish her either, it simply continued. She began volunteering on weekends almost by accident. The Women's Support Center was small, underfunded, and filled with stories that echoed too closely to her own betrayal, loss, decisions made in moments of weakness that unraveled entire lives. One afternoon, a young woman sat across from her, eyes red, voice shaking. "I ruined everything," she whispered. "Does it ever stop hurting?" She thought carefully before answering. "No," she said, "but it changes. It stops being a punishment and starts being a teacher." The woman nodded, clinging to the words like a lifeline. She recognized that feeling. Wesley didn't think about her often anymore. When memories surfaced, they arrived without heat, without longing, like photographs you no longer keep framed but don't destroy either. What he carried forward wasn't resentment. He had learned something essential in leaving. That love without trust corrodes quietly. That silence can be more honest than confrontation. That choosing yourself isn't selfish when staying would cost you your dignity. Ashlyn didn't need the details to understand these truths. She saw them in how he listened, in how he spoke carefully, in how he never made promises lightly. On the anniversary of what would have been their wedding day, Holly woke before dawn. She expected sadness. Instead, she felt resolve. She packed a small bag and drove out of the city, following a coastal road she'd never taken before. The sky lightened slowly as she arrived at the beach, the horizon bleeding gold into blue. She stepped out of her shoes and let the sand cool her feet. The waves rolled in steadily. "I release you," she whispered, not to him, but to the version of herself that had needed him to feel complete. The water carried the words away. That same morning, Wes woke beside Ashlyn to the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. She turned toward him, still half asleep. "You okay?" she murmured. He smiled, brushing her hair back gently. "Yeah," he said, "I really am." And he meant more than the moment. Later that day, Holly mailed a letter, words she needed to release. "I'm sorry, not to change the past, but to acknowledge it. I broke something precious. I've learned to live with that truth. I wish you peace. I'm finally learning how to choose honestly." She didn't wait for forgiveness. She didn't ask for it. That was part of the lesson. When the letter arrived, he recognized the handwriting instantly. He read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. No response, no reopening of doors. Some things don't need dialogue to be complete. That evening, he and Ashlyn cooked dinner together, music playing softly in the background. Laughter filled the kitchen. The past stayed where it belonged. Years later, when memory softened into something more reflective than sharp, Holly would look back on that week, the lie, the flight, the silence, not as the moment her life ended, but as the moment it was stripped down to its truth. At the time, it had felt like annihilation, but standing where she stood now, she understood something she hadn't been capable of seeing then. Some endings are not punishments, they are corrections. Her life became smaller and then steadier. She moved cities again. She studied in the evenings after work, choosing courses that demanded discipline and honesty rather than charm. She built a career slowly, deliberately, without shortcuts. When people asked about her past, she didn't dress it up. "I made choices that cost me deeply," she said, "and I learned from them." Some people pulled away, others leaned in. Those were the ones she trusted. She never married. She learned to be alone without being lonely, to enjoy quiet mornings, to sit with herself without distraction. Sometimes, late at night, she still thought of him, not with longing, but with clarity. He had loved her with steadiness and courage. She had loved him with avoidance and fear, and the difference had changed everything. His life moved forward without ever looping back. The house by the ocean, filled with the rhythms of a life well lived, morning coffee on the balcony, long walks without phones, conversations that never required decoding. Ashlyn grew older beside him, not as someone completing him, but as someone choosing him daily and being chosen in return. When people asked him how he'd known to leave so completely, he always answered the same way. Because staying would have cost me who I am. And that truth never wavered. One ordinary afternoon, years removed from the wreckage, Holly passed a bookstore window and stopped. A book had been placed in the front display. She stepped closer. There he was, older, calmer, undeniably himself. The book was about rebuilding after betrayal, about dignity, about walking away without cruelty and choosing peace without apology. Her breath caught. This, she realized, was the final consequence. Not the loss of him, but the certainty that he had transformed the pain she caused into something meaningful, something that helped others while she had been forced to transform herself. She smiled. She wrote in her journal, something she still did when life demanded reflection. He didn't punish me. He didn't humiliate me. He lived well, and that was the most devastating revenge of all. She closed the book gently and turned out the light. Somewhere else, at that same hour, he closed his laptop, the final draft of his next book complete. Ashlyn kissed his cheek as she passed through the room. "You done?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, smiling softly. "I think I am." Outside, the ocean moved steadily. He had learned the greatest truth of all. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to destroy. Sometimes the most wonderful revenge is simply walking away whole, living honestly, and never looking back. Thank you for spending time with me. If this story moved you, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. God bless you.